Hey everyone, I'm your host, Ben Lloyd Pearson, and today I am delighted to be joined by Ori Keren, co founder and CEO at LinearB. Thanks for joining us today, Ori.
Hi, Ben. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Ori, as always, it's really great to have you on our show. And Andrew, I want to welcome you to your first ever episode of Dev Interrupted.
Thank you, Ben. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, so we've actually dedicated some time next week to give you some time to introduce yourself to our audience. So definitely want everyone to tune in next week to wrap up our season with us and get to learn about who Andrew is and what the role he's going to play in Dev Interrupted moving forward. But today, I want to focus on what we've come here to talk to Ori about, and that is predictions for the year 2025. So, we're rapidly approaching the end of the year. And, as we reflect back on all the things that have happened here in 2024, I figured this would be a good time to start thinking about what we think software engineering is going to look like in 2025. So, Ori, I've got a few questions for you, so let's just jump right into them. And I want to start with, talking about just general trends and predictions related to what we're seeing from all the engineering leaders that we get the opportunity to speak to. So just at a high level, Ori, tell us, what do you think are some of the biggest trends that you see shaping software engineering in 2025?
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to surprise you and start with AI,
Yeah.
um, which I think is like the biggest trend that everybody's trying to wrap their head around. How will it look? Um, I think about it. I think in two kind of separate tracks. There's one where all the IDEs and the place where you get assistance, where it's not still like agentic, it's not an agent. I think these technologies will mature. We can speak later on like who's more benefiting from them and like has a better match like to utilize them. But as we spoke to leaders this year, it was hard for them still to like quantify if they get productivity gain from this and what is it exactly. And it seems like it's in early adoption. I predicted 2025 these technologies will mature and it will become more, ingrained into like the day to day of like a lot of the developers. By the way, I think mainly like junior developers, but not only. Um, and then you have the other side of like all the agentic AI and AI agents that can pop in and take it Jira ticket and issue a pull request based on Jira ticket and all that. I think it's almost like in, one phase before. This will be experimentation here for these type of things. There's a lot of like obstacles still like to overcome in order to embed this thing. So my prediction is that it's going to be an interesting year with AI agents in SDLC, but it's still going to be more of experimentation if it makes sense this year.
Yeah, honestly, I don't think we can get through an episode anymore without talking about AI because I mean it truly is like dramatically changing everything we know about how and it's not just software developers that are feeling this impact. I feel like it's all people who do informational work. We're all being impacted by this. Just like software developers seem to be one of the first big waves that it's really really becoming mainstream and taking off. Um, so so we obviously that's probably going to have a big impact on engineering organizations in this next year. Do you think that's like really like today is when they're going to start seeing like those huge impacts, or do you still think there are other tools out there that engineering teams should be looking to adopt like over the next year?
You're asking if there are more technologies and more trends that will be like impactful in 2025, or still talking specifically about AI?
Yeah, I mean, well, like, what's going to have the biggest, like, what tools are going to have the biggest impact over the next year? Is it AI, or is it going to be AI's impact on the other tools they use, or are there still other tools out there that we should be thinking about so that we're not completely focused on this one?
I think it's like um, there's other things that are going to happen, other predictions that I have, like in other areas, like but just to put AI like to bed for a second, I think it's not. It's about how you exactly how I think you asked it, how you integrate this thing into your existing tool chain. everybody talks about, hey, what it will replace, what it won't replace. I think um, it will still take time to understand how do you orchestrate all of this, how do you embed these technologies, when do you apply the human resource, when are you letting like agents go and do their thing. So in terms of like affecting like the tool chain, I think it's more about how you combine and how they live side by side. Some other interesting thing that I think are going to happen in 2025 or some other trends that are relevant is like, um, well, I'm not going to surprise anybody, but cybersecurity is still going to be something huge. I think you can see it from the macro level, like the world is shaking from any angle that you look at it. So it just raises like more cyber threats and uh, um, so cybersecurity definitely going to still play a major role in like everything companies do. The two that I'm really excited about are developer productivity and developer experience, and what do we do in these areas? But I don't know, like I'll let you lead. And when do you want to talk about these topics?
Yeah, those are definitely some topics that we want to dive into pretty deep. And I love the cybersecurity example because when I was getting into the profession, I remember script kiddies used to be like a term that was used almost in a derogatory way to people that would like copy scripts off the internet and use them to maliciously attack organizations. But now, I mean, you could theoretically have like AIs that teach you how to build this stuff. So it is, it really is gonna, it kind of does illustrate, I think, pretty well the impacts that these tools are gonna have like across the space. Um, so how do you think all of this is gonna impact the role of software engineer in 2025? So I think, historically, you think about a software engineer, there's somebody who is responsible for building things and coming up with novel and creative solutions to very concrete examples. Like, how is that going to change, like, as generative AI, like, changes the ecosystem?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because I think I spoke in a previous like podcast or something. Somebody asked me, and I remember when I was like a young developer, there's this spark of ideas that you have that is sometimes it's coming top down. Okay, like hey, I have an idea and I'm going to work on it and I'm going to implement it. And sometimes it's you start somewhere. It's almost like a little bit of it will sound like art a little bit, or like poetry. You start somewhere, you write something, and then ideas come to your head as and creative ideas as I build this. It's probably meaning I can build something that does this thing, and I can build an entire application. I have concerns that how with like um, when iPhones were introduced and we saved all our contacts, we just forgot all the phone numbers. And then navigation systems that were introduced, and then a lot of people just can't navigate if they don't have like Google Maps or Waze or something. Um, I think it's very important for developers to not be fully dependent on these code assists, etc. They're very important. They increase the productivity, but people still should learn languages, know their true and entire potential, so we don't lose this big creativity spark that we have. So it's like a first comment that I have, like regarding the roles. I think it's more maybe on leaders or the industry to think how do we preserve this creativity. That's again sometimes it's a fire that lit from like bottom up. Um, but when I think about the roles of like developers and and how the roles of developers will change, I kind of like divide it into two. I think for junior developers that will know how to utilize these, like IDE boosters, whether you use Copilot, Cursor, whatever you use, like um, there's going to be a gap. If you know how to use it, it will increase your productivity dramatically, and if you don't know how to use it, you're just going to stay behind. So that's kind of what I think about people who are starting, the first 2-3 years in development. I think the senior developers are very interesting because these folks, if they are able to leverage the entire potential that AI has to offer here, they could become small teams because they could say something like, okay, I'm going to deploy my energy only on these specific reviews. I'm going to have one agent that does like basic code reviews. I'm going to have one that just sits and look for, I don't know, what's wrong with my development pipeline, what's broken, where do I have maybe flaky tests that I can come in and fix, where do I have long build times, and people that can leverage this technology can become like almost like full teams with a lot of potential. So again, I started and I said it's still going to take time because I think these technologies are in experimentation. But that's the direction that I think like the industry will go.
Yeah, and
If it makes sense.
you're highlighting a really prevalent thing that we've seen a lot in the difference between like how junior developers versus senior developers are leveraging these tools. You think about like a junior developer, they may see efficiency gains from like, adding endpoints to like a standardized API, right? Like it's something that's repeatable and just takes like a little bit of like, for lack of a better term, intelligence to figure out how to replicate it. Versus like a senior engineer, like they seem to benefit more when you have the ability to like ask, have like a conversational interface into a complex code base, because then they can, decipher things that are maybe outside of their expertise a lot more rapidly, So yeah, it's a great insight.
Yeah, so far we've covered topics that I know are top of mind for a lot of engineering leaders, a lot of people that work in software. Things like how AI will impact their work and how it could change their role, and cybersecurity is a topic that we're going to continue talking more about. But I'm curious, what is maybe a challenge that you think engineering leaders are underestimating or not noticing going into next year?
Yeah. So I would say, mm, the first one is maybe what I spoke about. How do you maintain like this creativity, spark, and ability to build innovative products and innovative ideas? Again, sometimes they come top down, but a lot of the times, like the best companies in the world were started by developers, started with the ideas that people set and like did stuff with their hands, and then the ideas like propagate from there. So I think leaders need to maintain it. I think there's two other aspects of, uh, um, I think mm, mm, a small trend that I see that is there's convergence of technologies and they're becoming more homogeneous, if it makes sense. And then in the side, you got to maintain like a diverse like skill set. Like there's languages that people paying less attention, and all of a sudden they're saying, even though like it might be now like things are ramping up again. It's not always easy like to find your next job, but there are languages that I know that people are looking, and it's hard to find like talent there. So I think as leaders need to pay attention that they still have like a well diverse like skills in their teams, etc. The last thing is like humans. Don't forget you're working with people. It's like so easy to forget like this framework of like when I speak to when I was an engineering leader and I spoke to my managers, they say like all these things like people, process, product, like, and people is like we're working with people. Um, um, I don't know if we're going to talk about it, but you got to pay attention that they're in a risk of a burnout. What are you asking them to do? They're feeling threatened right now, by the way, by technology. There's a resistance. So if this role, by the way, I think engineering leader is the toughest role that exists out there. I was an engineering leader. I once said that being an engineering leader is harder than being a CEO. still think about it if it's still right every now and then, but it is a very hard role. Um, yeah, so I think those are like the things that I think people have to pay attention, leaders have to pay attention to.
Yeah, we've been hearing things about like, we had a round of layoffs that happened at a lot of organizations early this year. There's been a return to office mandates like all over the place. There's, a general sense, I think, in the engineering space that it's hard to know like where professional growth, like how does that happen? So it really does feel like there's a lot of things that are or putting like a downward pressure on DevEx. And I think that leads into like really the core of what we wanted to ask you about today. And that's, really developer experience and how it connects to overall developer productivity, which I know you have some issues with that phrase that we'll get into a little bit. But in terms of developer experience, so DevEx, so what are some emerging tools or practices that you're seeing out there in the engineering space that gets you excited?
Yeah, so I think the term that I have challenges developer productivity. We'll get to it later, hopefully. But developer experience is really interesting. I think it's kind of it reached like this interesting crossroad right now. Means journey because I think two challenges. First of all, it has like passive part of what do you measure. It's a lot about what do you measure, and also there's even arguments of how do you measure. So first of all, I think it's time for developer experience to move from in the how do you measure, and then we'll talk about active part. And how do you measure to move from just relying on these like almost semi-academic research surveys, and to get into the next level where it's a combination of measuring qualitative and quantitative things. Because, and in qualitative, I think it has to be much more embedded into the day-to-day of developers. Again, it's really hard. I remember myself as a developer to sit and like answer like this, again, almost semi-academic thing that ask me now questions. Hey, ask me 1 second after I just completed my task about what was my problem, etc., and you get a lot of insight. So I think developer experience has to solve this measure problem and to get to an understanding that you got to measure these qualitative things, but combine it with quantitative things. There are things you should be measuring. You should be measuring your build times. You should be measuring your stability of your CI and how much, deterministic it is. Like the most irritating thing as a developer is like you run a test, it fails, you run it, it fails, you run it again with the same condition and it succeeds. Now okay, next time you won't trust your test suite. So fixing those type of things, measuring how much you have them, test environments, adoption of like AI tools and the impact of them. So again, I was starting with the measure part. I think we got to jump to the next level where you combine qual and quant. And then I think the biggest challenge and the biggest potential of like innovation and things like to develop in developer experience is, okay, now that we got to some consensus on what we should be measuring and how, there's a huge opportunity to fix these things. And there's almost a thirst like to platforms that, fix these things for me. And it's not that complex. I think all the problems, all the challenge, all the things that we just mentioned, like again, if I see if the build time is too long, we can again deploy very interesting technologies now, like to shorten them.
Yeah.
If my tests are not stable, we can deploy agents like to fix these bugs. So, so I think like what excites me, I think there are good frameworks inside the developer experience. There is the SCI space, software engineering intelligence. There's IDPs, there's surveys, there's all these avenues that you can get the understanding about developer experience. we believe, and I believe in not just showing you where the problems, giving you tools to actually go and solve these problems. And I think that's like the leap that the developer experience movement will probably make this year.
Yeah, I think at the core of a lot of this problem is a lot of engineering organizations have this constant struggle to like justify investing in developer experience. You've got this business that's always asking to like produce new features and help us close deals and all that stuff. But developers want to make their lives easier. And I think some organizations are starting to get pretty good at articulating why we need to push back against business priorities sometimes to invest in developer experience. And I think this segues nicely into a question that you have, Andrew, about an issue that we're starting to see relatively frequently.
Yeah, I mean, we hear a lot in when we talk with folks about developer burnout and the experience that they have within their platforms, within working every day, creating the software they do. And something we hear consistently is that it's more about, we're wondering, is it about like the workload or is it about the way the developer's time is spent? And oftentimes you hear anecdotes about particularly frustrating things for them that are specific and maybe like you're referring to are solvable. And so how do you think leaders can address that imbalance for that experience for them?
I think you're touching a good point. Like, good leaders speak to their people all the time. Again, it's this triangle of like, how do I make sure that I have the right people, and I keep them happy, and I keep them productive? How do I have the right processes in place, and how do I make sure like I'm creating the right product? That's like I think the for engineering leaders. So when it comes to burnout, a lot of time it will be like kind of like together. Unfortunately, like somebody will say, "Hey, I'm like burning out," and probably they're working too much, and probably the reasons that they're working too much is because executing simple tasks is not easy for them because they're waiting for an environment to come up, or they're waiting for the CI to complete, and then after 1 hour it failed, and they're like, "Oh, I need to
Yeah,
wait again."
we've all been there.
Yeah, and so it's almost like this like there's a strong connection between those, unfortunately, that comes together because you asked if it's like more the time spent or the workload. Unfortunately, it comes together, and then people, and it's like a bad snowball effect, right? Because we talked about before, like companies need to test more in developer experience. It's hard for them sometimes to see that it will bring better productivity. Um, so to your question, I always think it's a combination of the both. Like you have committed people, they want to complete their task, but it's taking very much. Then they're just compensating with it on it with like a lot of hours, and it's like a vicious cycle that they're in.
Yeah. So before we get into our central topic on productivity, I want to ask you about the concept of like balancing developer freedoms with like more of a standardization and compliance sort of posture, because I think this also plays a big role in developer experience. Because you can think about like, let's just use generative AI as a good example of this. Um, Organizations who are providing more freedom to developers may be seeing more experimentation and new use cases emerging. However, the organizations who actually approach it in a much more structured and standardized like rollout approach are actually like leveraging bigger benefits from it because everyone sort of understands specific to their organization like how generative AI can impact it. So, when we think about like this balance of freedom versus standardization, like how do you think companies should be like focused on that over the next year?
I think companies need to define their philosophy. First of all, like think about it, dedicate time to thinking about it, come up with a strategy and your philosophy and the things that you believe in. When I was a young manager, I always wanted to like think about how do, after you do the first mistake and you fix a problem for, your developers instead of letting them like to learn on their own.
Right.
It's the same with the raising kids. Gotta let them fall. So you got to choose where you focus on. So I think one of the recommendations I have, I think we touched on it, but all these changes will bring a lot of like compliance requirements. Again, I like to do the analogy to like autonomous cars. Maybe the technology there, but there's a lot of like regulations that are not solved. Here, where it's like software, I think the technology will come too fast, and you'll have to have some orchestration and compliance around what do I allow and what do I don't allow. And then companies have to have like a strategy and a philosophy on, okay, in these areas, it's okay that we use different technologies and we try different things. But I don't know, when things go through the development pipeline, at the end of the day, we got to meet some compliance requirements. We got to go through SOC 2, whatever, like our processes. So then it's okay to have more uniformity in those areas. These are the checks that are being done. And this is technology that we're using to then I think it creates a good balance where like things are moving through the pipeline in CI, CD, etc. It's okay to have standardization and rules. And there are some languages that even let you write rules and program your pipeline. We know some of them. There are some great products that do that. And then over the IDEs and, while I'm building my code, etc., I would still allow like for more freedom because, again, it has less implications. Same goes for like when you deploy stuff and at the end of the day, you gotta have uniformity, but choose the areas where you allow some innovation and try new things where it's less risky. And going back to the example of where to follow, when I was a young leader, if I saw like a big mistake and it's gonna impact us dramatically, I wouldn't let it happen. But this is 1 out of 10. 9 out of 10, let the mistake happen. It's fine. Like, this is how people learn and how they improve.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure my kid's school calls that natural consequences, for living with natural consequences. Yeah, it's actually a great learning technique. So let's get into the topic of productivity now, or developer productivity, or software engineering productivity. This is kind of a loaded term because I think a lot of organizations realize they need to focus on it, but it also is a term that kind of feels like you're going to start spying on your developers and potentially firing them if they don't have the right numbers. So given that, like, what are the big challenges that you think that engineering teams are facing now relative to the concept of developer productivity?
Yeah, I would start with just adding something again, like to what you said. It's a loaded term because I think I spoke about it before, but it's like I don't like. Well, it is what it is. This is the term. It's here to stay. But if you do an analogy to sales, for example, and people use sales efficiency. So two things like they use the word efficiency, and sales is like the action that you do. It's not like the people who do it. So it's about how do we improve the process of sales. And unfortunately here, not only we didn't choose the action, we choose people. And instead of choosing plural, because I think development is team sports, like you work together, everybody does CV. We choose in this term, and I say we, like the people chose this term, single developer. So it's kind of a loaded term because when you say developer productivity, oh, what do you mean? This is the thing that you measure the developers and you rank them. No, so this is why I think people need to see beyond the term developer productivity to represent how do you increase the efficiency of the development process. So that's why again, if we could like turn back time and invent a different term, it would be great, but we can't, and it's here to stay with us. I think what the thing that I'm seeing in developer productivity that is really interesting is all these contrasts. I think you spoke about it, like all these on one hand, you have, hey, we gotta apply AI because everybody's talking about the big promise that it brings. On the other hand, it's like, how do we put controls on it? And how do we um, not forget about our people and like apply the human factors? That's a big challenge for developer productivity. You talked about like, yeah, these two movements of like working hybrid and going back like to work from the offices. Still, again, two big contrasts and strong. If the war didn't have enough polarity, they're bringing it to developer productivity as well. Oh, 5 days at the office, no, hybrid. So, and again, like we talked about, like your question about the uniformity of like, hey, we're using the same tech stack for everybody. That's what we do. There's a lot of developer experience team that where we're doing centralized tooling and they're purchasing like for the entire organization, etc. Versus like the freedom to choose. So I think the biggest challenge, the theme is this contrast and how do you balance all these contrasts. That's I think the biggest challenge of developer productivity. And um, because you have all of that, I think you don't have any other leaders don't have any other choice but to decide what is important to them, yeah, and measure it so they can optimize it and they can start improving it. Like, and you don't have to attack all the problems at once, but measure the things that are important to you. Again, like we said, you find your philosophy, your strategy. Where are you in all these contrasts? What is your choice? Because not choosing is the worst. Like, what is your approach in all of this? Define it. Then make sure you're measuring like the right things to improve the productivity, and also choose frameworks that not just let you look at them and what you measure, but also give you means like to drive improvement with developer productivity. So I hope it makes sense.
I really like how you framed the discussion as being polarizing. And oftentimes when you go down the list of things that we use to define developer productivity, they're divided into two camps that people find themselves in the whole way down the rubric. And you touched earlier on the human factor of working with other people and communicating. Do you think that that is the real secret sauce here to developer productivity? Is it about finding that common ground between these camps and understanding the shared goals that you have? And how would you recommend someone in either one of those camps? Maybe it's someone who's more IC oriented or someone more manager oriented. How would you give them advice to try to find a common perspective?
Yeah, so for leaders, I think leaders have been living this reality for a long time, like engineering leaders. Spoke about it a bunch of times in other conversations, but engineering leaders have seen this like almost parallel universe. We call it sometimes the dual Monday for years now. You have like you turn left and you speak to your engineering organization, and it's one language of how do we, I don't know, decrease the time like that we deploy to production, deploy more times. It's what do we need to improve? Like, how do we improve the developer experience, our development pipeline? Like, where should we, where are we in the cloud, cloud native development, like Kubernetes adoption? All fascinating topics. Then you turn to the other side and you speak to the business, and they don't. It's like
They have no
change.
idea. They have no idea what
They
any
don't
of that
need.
is.
It's like, yeah, any of it is. So I think for leaders, for a long time, they had to do this trick where connect the dots trick. I always like to say, hey, put some key metrics, take some key business metrics, and just draw a line between them so the business understand. But it's an art. You gotta be great at this. Like, so I think same goes here. It's like at the end of the day, that's the human charm. Like good leaders. It doesn't have to be like engineering. There's good team leaders, tech leads, good developers can bridge between like these camp, find like the their path of like what do we take from this? Whether even if you look at like I don't know, a hybrid versus uh, um, going back to office, maybe there's a middle ground here. Maybe you work 2 days from office. I'm just throwing an idea.
Another question I had, this is related to my own experience. I onboarded for a new role recently, and something that was really fascinating for me was onboarding and kind of like in the middle of the AI transformation of a lot of tools people are using. And that actually helped expedite a lot of things for me. I had almost like a personalized assistant that I could ask questions to for lots of different resources and tools that I was added to. It was quick to jump in on context of things that was going on around me. Um, and I'm wondering now, having gone through that experience and learned at a more rapid pace, maybe what's some advice that you would give to somebody who's maybe finding themselves in like a newly promoted or newly hired like engineering leadership role? They're hungry and they're excited to go in next year. Maybe they're taking over a new team or a new project. There were opportunities for me to take advantage of new tools. What opportunities do you see for them to maybe be, a better leader going into next year?
Yeah, for engineering leaders, I'll go back to the things I think I spoke about. Acknowledge this dual mandate. Acknowledge the fact that it's two different language. Master both of them. It's just you can't choose one. You just uh, the best leaders that I've seen like could speak on like an architectural problem and with engineers and get fascinated about it and offer their opinion. By the way, the greatest leaders like also know how to remove themselves like from some of these discussion or speak less, because if you come and then your opinion, everybody will align with you. And on the other hand, you can't not tie everything that you do like to business objectives, because this is the time. Like you can see like the demand, like the executive table, like they're asking these questions. You need to be prepared to answer them. How do you allocate your resources? Where do you invest time, and why did you choose? So that's just don't forget about that. That's my first opinion. First suggestion: measure the things that you believe in. Choose what you measure, and but the things that you believe in. And some people's styles like, okay, collaborate with the team and decide. Some people say, okay, on some things I am going to collaborate, but here are the top things that I'm measuring. And you can't. It's I don't think we can go through another year where engineering leaders like saying to themselves, yeah, maybe I can get along without measuring. You can't optimize what you're not measuring. And I have examples where I've seen like people in the past saying, yeah, we measured a bunch of things. We know where we are now. We're good. So we're gonna put the focus on other things, not measuring. And I always tell them, can you imagine a VP of sales coming to I don't know, a board meeting or a staff meeting on Monday and say, listen, I got this funnel thing going. Like, I don't need to see the funnel. I know where the problems are. We measured it, so I now know what problems are. I'm going to stop measuring. So I won't know how many opportunities we have. Won't know like where do I have bottlenecks in my funnel. So we need to get to that level where people understand that like this is the basic level. I think people need to require more from systems that help them do that. Okay, once you help me measure and see the problems, offer me solution, give me frameworks, give me languages almost like to fix my pipeline where I see problems. And then I will go like we talked about, define your philosophy, invest in that. Go speak to other leaders, to people that report to you, to your peers. We're getting like close to the end of the year, so it's a good time, like, prepare a strategy for the year with all the challenges that we spoke about, with all this polarity, with all this. Hey, you can go. Maybe you believe that everybody should come back to the office, have a discussion, see what the impact will be if you do that. Choose your philosophy, go with your strategy, and deploy it. And then don't forget, at the end of the day, it's still this framework of people, process, product. So don't forget about the people element. I'll keep mentioning it.
Wonderful. So you've shared lots of great advice for engineering leaders going into next year. So I just got one more question for you before we head out. What do you have any bold predictions for next year? Like things
Oh, yeah.
that you really want to just stand out?
Yes. Here's what's going to happen. It's scary. I predict that productivity will go down next year. It will decrease.
Wow.
I think if you can, again, you don't have a single metric. You're measuring a bunch of things. But at the end of the day, it will actually decrease a little bit. Why? Because in every change that you go through, we talked about it, like people still experiment here, experiment there. There's going to be a lot still like moving parts. And in every adoption of a new technology or change, like you first go through this like dip where, hey, should I really do this? Like, how does that work? You'll still get to resist. There's a lot of resistance, by the way. Developers are worried. So you still get this resistance. People will need to feel comfortable with it. So I actually predict it will take like, some time, and then it will climb back up, and then this change will be amazing. Then you'll get this like 10x promise, but it won't happen overnight. I don't think next year will be like great. Hey, with the same amount of people, let's say you have 100 developers 1,000 developers in your organization, with the same amount of people, you can do 10x thing. It won't happen. It maybe even go down a little bit. That's my bold prediction. Before people know how to embrace, adopt these technologies, combine like the human factor in them, and then grow from there. Then you'll get this like productivity gain. So yeah, also we need to manage the expectations around that. But that's my bold prediction.
We've asked you a lot of questions today, and I'm wondering, based on our discussion, if you had to ask our audience or our listeners one thing about their own engineering practices, what would it be and why?
I would ask them one thing. Hey, are you data-driven? And data-driven, it doesn't mean, hey, do you have the right metrics? Data-driven means like, did you adopt technology that help you map exactly like we spoke, like how, Salesforce and all this sales are mapping the funnel, the pipeline. Map your pipeline. It will pay you dividends as you go forward, because that's where you can first with your eyes like detect bottlenecks, and then deploy AI applications and a lot of advanced things to fix the problems that you see. But this is a time for transformation, because people that will be data driven and invest in it like in the next year, they will harvest the fruits of that like in the coming years. So that's the one question. Hey, did you become data driven in your R&D organization? I think that's the one question to ask.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Ori. It's always a pleasure to have your insights to share with our audience.
Yeah, I got a lot of things wrong, so because I'm not a prophet, so I'm just using my insight. But thanks, it was great. Thanks for being here. Great questions.
Yeah, well, that's it for today's show. And thank you to our audience for joining us all the way to the end. If you like this show, the best way to support us is to go and rate our podcasts on your preferred platform, whether that's Spotify, Apple, anywhere else. If we got a bunch of stuff that you think is wrong, go out there and tell us about it. But more, you can even go out and tell us that on LinkedIn. You can connect with Andrew, Ori, or I on LinkedIn, or just join the conversation on the Dev Interrupted LinkedIn page. And lastly, if you're looking for more insights from engineering leaders, head over to the Dev Interrupted Substack, where you'll get weekly deep dives into articles and our favorite episodes just like this one. So thank you, everyone. We'll see you next week.